These are both heavy diesel fuel injectors. They're both unit injectors, meaning they are a fuel pump and an injector in one. They are both direct injection. They're both electronically controlled, but that's where the similarities end. This one is a hydraulic electronic unit injector, also known as a HEUI, and this one is a mechanical electronic unit injector. So let's have a look at how they work and what are the differences. Starting with the HEUI, it is a unit injector and it uses hydraulic oil in the form of engine oil in order to actuate the injector. Now it uses the engine oil from the sump itself. It's shared between lubricating and cooling the engine and also operating the fuel system. We have a separate HEUI pump which increases the pressure of that engine oil from around about 1400 psi all the way up to about 3,500. This high pressure engine oil is fed through the HEUI manifold, which in this case bolts on top of the cylinder head, and it feeds each individual injector with that high pressure engine oil. Now the engine oil enters through the top of the injector and it acts a little bit like a hydraulic cylinder. We're converting hydraulic pressure into mechanical force. Now this mechanical force of the piston moving down onto the plunger assembly is converted back to hydraulic force on the diesel in the bottom side of this injector here. And it's also magnified by 6 times. So if we have 1,000 psi on the top, we'll have 6,000 psi of fuel injection pressure. As the pressure comes up on here, the pressure will also increase here by 6 times. The injector itself gets fed fuel from a transfer pump, pumping fuel out of the fuel tank through the fuel filters at around about 65 psi, and it enters through the side of the injector ready for injection. That also comes through the HEUI manifold and it returns through there as well. Once we are ready for injection, the ECM will activate this solenoid at a relatively high voltage. That will pull the poppet across and open the port for the high pressure oil to actuate the piston. At the same time, it also blocks any oil exiting so we can create that high pressure to actuate the injector. As the piston moves down, it blocks any diesel from returning as well, and it creates quite a bit of high pressure diesel in the bottom side of the injector. There is a needle and a spring here, and at 4,000 psi, it will start to open. And this thing can inject up to 23,500 psi through the nozzle of atomized diesel for complete combustion. Once injection is over, the ECM will stop energizing the solenoid, the poppet will return via a spring, the engine oil can then be released, the piston will retract, the plunger will retract, and so will the needle. Everything retracts on a spring, ready for the next injection cycle. And of course, the pressure will drop in here, and that returns everything back to the closed position. The longer the ECM holds current in this solenoid, the longer it stays open, and the more fuel we're going to inject. Now the MEUI works under a very similar principle. It's been around a lot longer, perhaps without the electronic side, but the idea is very similar to the HEUI. In this case, we're using a mechanical actuation of the plunger, and the solenoid is controlling fuel returning to tank. We have an extra lobe on our camshaft, which is actuating the plunger at every time we'll need ignition. Now the MEUI is still receiving transfer fuel from the fuel pump the same way we are with the HEUI. Around about 65 psi is coming in through the delivery port, and it's been returned through the return line. The difference here is when we want to start injection, the ECM will power the solenoid and it will close the cartridge valve, and therefore closing any exit path for that fuel. We then slam the plunger with the camshaft, and that fuel has nowhere to go but to be injected through the needle valve at the bottom here. At around about 5,000 psi, the needle will pull off the seat and we'll begin injection. Now these can inject to around about 25,000 psi. When we no longer want to have injection, we turn the solenoid off, the ECM will switch it off. That return port will then be open, the cartridge valve will open, and the fuel can return to its usual return line. The plunger will still do a full stroke no matter what. It's controlled by the camshaft, but injection is controlled by how long the ECM decides to close the cartridge valve, closing off any return fuel. That will determine how much fuel we inject. So which one's better? Well, when it comes to better, we have a look at the pros and the cons. A few pros of the HEUI is that at low RPM, they can operate high injection pressure still if we have a variable displacement pump. We are not bound by the speed of the engine. We can crank a lot of pressure into the top of these regardless of our RPM. They also will save your engine if you run out of engine oil. You will not seize your engine because the HEUI injectors won't work without any engine oil pressure. They're also very good. We can vary the timing to pretty much whenever we want because we're not bound by the camshaft, and there's no maintenance when it comes to doing a valve lash. With these, you have to do an injector height. With these, you just do your valve lash and you move on. It makes the camshaft a little bit simpler as well. On the Cons side of things, they do use the engine oil from the sump, and hydraulics don't tend to like dirty oil, which means more oil changes, more intervals, usually every 5 to 10,000 Ks, where these might be more like 10,000 to 15,000 Ks. So there is a bit more maintenance involved. They give more opportunity for potential oil leaks. There's a lot more going on. And of course, there's a very expensive HEUI pump there as well, which is not only adding a parasitic load to the engine, but it's also quite expensive if it goes wrong. With the MEUI, a few of the pros are they are much simpler in design. We have no HEUI pump, which is loading up our engine, and we have longer oil change intervals because we're not relying on engine oil to operate our injectors. Our oil change intervals can be extended a little bit longer to pretty much a normal diesel engine. On the Cons side of things for the MEUI, we do have to do an injector height every time we do a valve lash. We do have a timing window which is set by the cam. We can't time it anywhere we want. There's a little bit of adjustment in the ECM timing the opening of the solenoid, but not as much as we have with the HEUI. Of course, we've got a more complicated camshaft, and at low RPM, we will have lower injection pressures because we cannot control how fast the plunger moves. It's fixed to the cam speed. So that's the two of them there. They've pretty much nowadays been replaced with common rail fuel injection. We can get higher pressures, we can time it wherever we want, we can have pre-injection and post-injection and all sorts of fancy things with the common rail system. But these two existed long before that, and a lot of our nation was built with diesel engines running these type of injectors. I don't think any one is better than the other. We're seeing a lot more of these still nowadays. The HEUIs are starting to die out a little bit, but they're still both excellent engineering designs, and whichever one you get, as long as you look after your vehicle, do your injector height adjustments, change your oil regularly, they're both going to give very good service. Excellent injectors, and something we're going to see less and less of with emission controls and common rail, hybrids, and of course EVs as well.